In 1977, Star Wars revolutionized film history. With motion-controlled camera miniature effects. A 60-shot space battle scene, this was not just a movie, but George Lucas's declaration of a visual revolution. However, this revolution had a hidden secret. Why was the forbidden compositing technique of white miniatures on white background used in The Empire Strikes Back? Why did Jurassic Park awaken Lucas and open the door to the original Star Wars? The CGI dinosaurs ILM created for Spielberg surprised Lucas himself. The moment that changed the future of cinema. Today, I'll share the forbidden behind-the-scenes story.
It's been running for 42 years, and it's actually one of the longest series in the film industry. I think the longest is 007, but 007 episodes are self-contained and don't really change much depending on the order. Since it's not always the same actors, Star Wars is probably the longest series that clearly continues the story with the same actors. Like Terminator, which also has sequels, but it keeps getting reset frequently. I think Star Wars is the longest in the film industry for continuously telling one story. Since it's been going on for 42 years, someone who was 14 when the first movie came out is now around 56 years old. So, there are relatively few people who have followed the entire series. The favorite Star Wars varies by generation. For example, Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back is popular among male otaku over 50, that's Episode 5. These Episode 5 and Episode 6 designations are confusing. I dislike this. The first ones made were Episodes 4, 5, and 6, which concluded in 1983 after 6 years, and everyone thought it was over. At that time, I was glad I didn't have to remember the episode. Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. I wish I only had to remember this. Everyone thought this was the end, and from today, this series, I'll call this the original Star Wars within this context. There's the original, and the story before that is the first one. It gets complicated because the first Star Wars will be made next. The original Star Wars is the main Star Wars. From Episode 4 to 6. Towards the end of the 20th century, there was an unexpected sequel in 1999, and it was a story that goes back about 30 years before the original Star Wars. This is where things got complicated. The original Star Wars, right? The original started with Episode 1 in 1999. And then a new one came out every 3 years, with Episode 3 concluding in 2005. At that point, it was supposed to be over for good. George Lucas even said, "I'm not making any more." And when fans asked at events, he'd say, "Shut up. I'm absolutely not making any more." To recap, the first Star Wars came out in 1977. And Mobile Suit Gundam came 2 years later in 1979, that's the era we're talking about. Over the next 6 years, 3 films were made. And just when we thought it was over, the original Star Wars came back. From 1999, 3 films every 3 years. Just when we thought it was done, 2015 came around. For 4 years now, 3 films have been released every 2 years, with the latest one this year. This is the continuation of the original Star Wars series. So there's the original, the prequel era, and now the continuation of Star Wars. The story has finally started to flow. The reason why it always follows the pattern of "is this the end?" or "an unexpected sequel" is actually, each series, the original and the continuation, has its own unique characteristics. For example, the original mastered analog special effects. Basically, George Lucas wanted to revolutionize film technology, reviving genres like special effects movies and monster films that were thought to be dying. The position of the original Star Wars was to challenge the film industry by showing what could be done with current technology in genres previously considered dead. The original showed that digital compositing technology exists, so you don't have to be constrained by locations or sets. It was a declaration that filmmaking had entered an era where directors could create exactly what they imagined. A declaration and an agitation. The original Star Wars. So, people say that movies from the 21st century after the original Star Wars use a lot of CGI. That allows directors to directly translate their vision into images. This was George Lucas's proposal, and now movies worldwide are following this approach. The new Star Wars. The current one. The current one is no longer from George Lucas's hand, with his unique authorial style, with a theme and something he wanted to say. It has been handed over to Disney. It's like how Studio Ghibli was passed on after Hayao Miyazaki passed away, and given to Toshio Suzuki and Disney. So the current Star Wars has become a rather ordinary movie. Now, regarding the analog special effects and film technology innovation of the original trilogy, it was like a challenge asking, can such a movie really be made? Can such visuals really be created? For example, in the first Star Wars, computer-controlled cameras, perfectly composited miniatures with backgrounds. Before Star Wars, special effects movies had fixed camera positions, and miniatures moved in only one direction. For instance, this is from the movie The Last Day of Earth. The arc rocket, when showing it in a movie, it would typically move in just one direction, whether from above, sideways, or at an angle. \n against that, the starry sky would be composited, with the stars moving in a consistent direction. So now, the camera can move in closer. Separation shots like this are standard, right? This was completely impossible in old special effects movies. And here's why. If the Ark ship was flying, they would cut a composite mask around it. And then they would flow starry backgrounds through that masked area, so it could only move in a fixed direction. So the set for this became incredibly huge. This is a miniature of the Ark ship itself, about 1.5 meters long. Consider it quite large. This is from the last scene. The rail goes up the mountain and launches from the top, and this over 1 meter rocket miniature runs up the rail in a single take. Firing rocket thrusters, running straight along this rail without any tricks. I'll go all the way up, so you can see how massive the set is. Old special effects movies were expensive. Expensive. Because they were expensive, scenes like these were only about 4 or 5 cuts in total. From the perspective of world cinema history, Japanese monster movies exceptionally have many special effects scenes. A single film might have 40 or 50 such cuts. Instead, they feature scenes of people in monster suits destroying miniature cities. Overseas productions focus more on realism, especially in terms of rigidity. They also need incredibly large sets. Usually, 4 or 5 cuts in a single movie would be considered good. However, the first Star Wars had an incredibly high number of cuts. Around 60 cuts, roughly speaking. The reason for this is when shooting miniatures, first moving the camera to capture it three-dimensionally, so you can shoot scenes freely. With scenes that can be shot freely, and the background adjusted accordingly. At a certain point, moving the computer camera exactly the same way, using a motion control camera system, In other words, miniature compositing became easier, and cool scenes could be shot relatively cheaply. That's around the first scene of Star Wars. What Star Wars achieved. From the back seat. George Lucas is essentially a visual artist. Rather than a filmmaker who likes making money, he used money as a means to innovate technology massively. Always creating new visuals no one had ever seen before. Not only that, but he was also an agitator who wanted to revolutionize the film industry worldwide and guide everyone in that direction. So, without new experiments, I won't make movies. And without a visual revolution, I won't make a new Star Wars. So in the second film, The Empire Strikes Back, is the was perfect compositing. This white body flies over placing a white miniature on a white background. This compositing technique was forbidden in sci-fi films until then. When compositing, as I mentioned earlier, the original Star Wars, the consecutive trilogy from 1977 to 19... Luke Skywalker, a regular guy living on a rural becomes a Jedi Knight and goes on a simple adventure to defeat the Galactic Empire. There were some tough moments, with some twists and turns. It's ultimately a great... After that, George Lucas suddenly... This is the story of Luke's father. Anakin Skywalker, Luke's father, who is basically just a child. Literally like a kid from Crayon Shinchan. This is a story of growing from childhood to youth, and tragically falling into the hands of evil along the way. It's a sad tale. Unlike Star Wars, which is all about justice will definitely win. The righteous will triumph. This original Star Wars, from around 30 years ago, had to tell a painful and sad story. George Lucas, in fact, originally wanted to create a serial series, making a 30-minute film, and releasing a new episode in theaters every week, which is like a TV series today. He wanted something like Netflix, a TV series format, but in movie theaters. Even if the first episode started with a somewhat sad story, by the fourth or fifth week, if it built up excitement, the audience would definitely follow along. In a 2-hour movie, the original Star Wars series, he's making 3 movies with a sad story in 2 hours. So there are quite a few precedents, right? The current Star Wars sequel is about what happens next. Going back to the beginning, and then to an even later era. Searching for the mysterious Rey's past. Then Kylo Ren, Anakin's grandson, gets involved. And that's kind of how the story goes. This is the current Star Wars sequel. Originally, George Lucas. He was planning to quit the original Star Wars. The reason was that if he truly visualized the image from here on, the budget would be infinite. This was the first explanation of why he planned to quit in the first season. However, George Lucas's friend Steven Spielberg, who was a fellow independent filmmaker in college, thought, this guy is incredibly amazing, and they became friends, and he made the movie Jurassic Park. At the time of Jurassic Park, he commissioned the special effects to ILM, George Lucas's company. He was planning to create the Velociraptor and everything mostly with robots. But robots just didn't move well. Especially the Tyrannosaurus Rex is huge, but its movements tend to become heavy. To explain the theory that dinosaurs are ancestors of birds, the dinosaur movements, I wanted to make them faster than anyone had ever seen before. I was wondering how to shoot them. I thought I'd have to use puppets with human hands inside, but then George Lucas's special effects team ILM's computer graphics team created the dinosaurs using computer graphics. Spielberg didn't believe it at all, but when he saw it, he was like, wow, this is usable. Especially with the T-Rex, it first started with just the skeleton moving. And when muscles were added, it moved properly with the muscle movements. When I put skin on top to show muscle movement, the skin warps with muscle movement, creating wrinkles that look incredibly realistic. Spielberg said, wow, this is it, and cancelled some of the robot dinosaurs he had previously ordered, making Jurassic Park a surprisingly unique film where computer graphics became the main characters. George Lucas was even more shocked. Despite researching this at his own company, he didn't believe in these computer-generated creatures. As a filmmaker, he believes what's in front of him, but with such CG, he wondered how far computer graphics could really go. Of course, he had used some in films like Return of the Jedi. I didn't believe it at first, but this might actually work. During Return of the Jedi, what really got to me was when I was operating the Jabba the Hutt monster. When I brought out Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back, the Yoda puppet was controlled from below. Basically a character like a towel puppet type, that's what Yoda was. Like Luke, used the Force. That kind of character, you know. Its movement was so good, it looked almost alive. I paid Frank Oz's team a mountain of money and asked them to create something like a 3-meter-long slug monster. Frank Oz's team worked really hard and created a 3-meter-long slug. It took about 20 people to do it. But no matter how you look at it, it just looks like a 3-meter costume. It's nothing like what George Lucas imagined. There's even a blue elephant playing an Eletone keyboard. And again, it just looks like a blue elephant costume, playing an Eletone keyboard. But I love those analog special effects from that era. George Lucas, after all, not the type to say, this has a nice flavor. As a visual artist, if we were total otaku nerds like myself, if George Lucas was an otaku nerd like James Cameron, probably with cheap special effects in The Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi, I think he would have been grinning and giving the okay. But George Lucas is a visual artist, so it's not like, this tastes good. He was thinking, this is a revolution in visuals. However, with the computer graphics technology used in Jurassic Park that I mentioned earlier, he thought, we could make a more decent alien with this. This is finally the original Star Wars. In other words, the Clone Wars from over 30 years ago could actually be made, I thought. However, George Lucas said initially that he was divorced and had no money. So, he came up with modifying the computer graphics system for practice. Modifying the system and adding CG to some scenes. For example, when X-Wing fighters first go to the Death Star, there were relatively few ships and few camera accesses. The shots were also monotonous, so we tried to make it more three-dimensional. So when I released it, I replaced the monsters and aliens with digital effects. Aliens were also digitally swapped out. Then the movie became a hit, and the video sold like crazy, simply by switching some scenes to digital. Just by adding CGI, fans were happy to watch. And with lots of money coming in, we finally had funding. We now had money to make a new film. We also discovered through experiments that entire backgrounds can be created with CGI. This could revolutionize the film industry far more than monsters or aliens. Because in Hollywood, there was originally a historical strategy. There used to be historical film strategies, like movies about Cleopatra or Ben-Hur. In the past, there were many films depicting historical stories with Moses saying, "Witness the power of..." The sea split in half, and the Jewish people would rush out in masses. Those kinds of films might have disappeared completely. That's because creating sets was incredibly difficult. The handover between new and old characters works incredibly smoothly. Apparently, around 1 billion people watch worldwide. There's nothing else like it. This was already clear when episode 1 was released. Even during episode 1, it was incredibly exciting, and people kept saying, "Disappointing, disappointing." How long did it take for that disappointment to disappear? In episode 3, when the twin suns set on Tatooine, everyone suddenly went, "Wow, that was a great movie," just like that. But Abrams knew that from the beginning. He said, "Anyway, Star Wars. I want to see it, but please spare me the movie, please spare me." Originally, Star Wars was about Return of the Jedi. In other words, during episode 6, Steven Spielberg was initially supposed to direct. When the first Star Wars film was released, it was an instant massive hit. At that time, George Lucas was so afraid of Star Wars' reputation that he fled to Hawaii. I was hiding out in Hawaii, and while on the beach, I ran into my acquaintance Steven Spielberg, who asked, "What's going on?" I said, "I just had a massive hit with Mist, so I'm in a great mood and came to Hawaii to relax." While playing on the beach, we were discussing, what should I do? I'm making this thing called Star Wars, what kind of movie will it be? And we got excited about the Indiana Jones concept right there. Let's make it together. I'll be the director, you'll be the producer. It's a deal. We sealed it with a pinky promise, and that's how Indiana Jones was created. Apparently, this project was conceived right there on the beach in Hawaii. This was published in Star Rouge magazine at the time as a secret story of Indiana Jones. Essentially, a story known by all 50-something sci-fi fans about the beautiful friendship between George Lucas and Spielberg. And at the same time, when Star Wars was a huge hit, they decided to make a sequel. He was announcing that he would make multiple sequels. Initially, it was going to be 9 episodes. There was also a time when he said 12 episodes. At that time, Spielberg was saying, "Let me do it. I absolutely want to do it." Anyway, he was saying he absolutely wanted to do one Star Wars film. However, Star Wars became such a huge hit that Hollywood, George Lucas and Spielberg were subjected to relatively light bullying. Whenever they tried to do something, they were told it was impossible or met with opposition. For example, Star Wars was made as George Lucas's personal film from the Empire era, so Lucasfilm appears first. According to the Directors Guild regulations, the director's name must appear first in the staff credits. Producer George Lucas was bullied, being asked, "What's this about?" Lucasfilm argued it was their company name, but that was completely rejected. Eventually, George Lucas got angry and quit the Directors Guild. Then Spielberg, who was in the guild, was like, "Wait, I can't direct Star Wars." So it meant Spielberg could no longer direct Star Wars. He was supposed to do Return of the Jedi, but couldn't. Honestly, if Spielberg had directed scenes like the Bear's Big Moment on Ender, it would have definitely been more interesting. What else was there? Galactic Emperor. Also, the conflict between suffering Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. If Spielberg did it, Darth Vader would go right, left, left. Which side are you on, son? That kind of ridiculous scene. I think that part could have been better. Well, that part is unfortunately unfortunate. Well, that's how it is. The strong characters of the original Star Wars, though the story kind of drifted.